although nowhere as large as its better-known German equivalent, Colditz, the imposing stone structure in Castello di Vincigliata has sat on a Tuscany hill just outside Florence since the 13th century. During its long history, the castle has been home to princes, monks and bankers, before falling into rack and ruin when, rather ironically for this recollect, a well-heeled Englishman, John Temple Leader, restored it to its neo-Gothic glory in the mid-19th century. When Leader died in 1903, he left it to his nephew, who promptly flogged it off. In World War II, it was requisitioned by the Italian military to house or contain VIP Allied prisoners. General Richard O'Connor, 6th Earl of Ranfurly, springs to mind. Most of the POWs accumulated in the fighting in North Africa. Speaking of which, General O'Connor insisted he would only surrender to Rommel himself. The Germans obliged that request. Vincigliata became Campo Concentramento 12 for the duration of the Italians' involvement in the war. Concentration Camp 12 to you and me. No connection with the German version, by the way. Camp 12 from here on in. In case you're wondering what happened to the castle in 2024, I don't know. I'm not too sure. At one point it was a rather picturesque celeb wedding venue. And back to the castle in the war. The then Camp 12 held between 20 to 30 distinguished prisoners starting at the end of 1941. In some cases, their batmen as well. And they received luxuries other prisoners would give their IT for. Reasonable food, leather chairs, gardens to potter around in. This was very much a British Commonwealth affair. Examples of the imperial flavour to the prisoners of war: a South African Brigadier, a Kiwi Anglican bishop appointed as the head military chaplain for the New Zealand forces, a British Major General who in civilian life was best known for producing photographic-like paintings, a talent he put to good use during his incarceration, making indistinguishable ID cards and even wartime Italian coupons and currency. Then there was also a Victoria Cross winner who had won the gold medal at the Paris 1924 Olympics in shooting. As an interesting side story to the main escape feature, some of you may well remember an episode of the series Colditz where a prisoner attempts to fake being insane in order to be released on medical grounds. Tweedledum. In the process, though, and succeeded to just go mad, resulting in further escape attempts using this method being banned. Flight Lieutenant John Leeming, housed at our castle, and tried the same ploy, feigning a mental breakdown, and it worked. In 1943, Leeming went before a panel of Swiss and Italian doctors to assess his mental health. He was repatriated, went on to write that book about his wartime exploits you're looking at, others as well. As you can see, not always in the genre of non-fiction, if you avert your eyes from the foreground of the cover 2/6, a Vincigliata-like castle appears. A couple of pertinent things I'd like to acknowledge before I present the biographies of our 6 escapees. The first being, at the very time this all went down, Italy was still in the war. There was still fight in the dog. Italy wouldn't pull out of the conflict till September 43, roughly 4 months after this escape. When it was announced Italy was throwing in the towel, and this led to guards across the Italian POW network simply not turning up to work one morning, trudging back home to mum or the wife. By the close of 43, it wasn't unheard of for prisoners to walk out of the main gates unchallenged, make their escape via sympathetic village to sympathetic village. As you will find out in part 2 later, the unsuccessful escapees here, plus the ones that didn't make the escape team, ultimately escaped, or most of them did, many, during the same lax circumstances. When we are talking here though, the task was a mite tougher. total successful escapes from Italian prisoner of war camps prior to the armistice. 3, 2/3 of which I'm covering right now. The other factor I'd like to point out, in a major divergence to the Colditz story, The Great Escape, most of any other WW2 escapes you can think of, our main characters here weren't exactly spring chickens. Rough average age, 52. As a reference point, Pat Reed was 32 when he squeezed through the air duct at Colditz. One of those that joined him was a Canadian, Hank Wardell, aged 27. Having the odd grey hair, or none whatsoever, it did work in their favour. In the on-the-run phase, not so much. The digging bit. What follows is the bio on our 6 escapees. One of them I've already touched on, General Sir Richard Nugent O'Connor, hitherto now just known as O'Connor. He was around 53 at the time and had been the commander of the Western Desert Force when the war broke out. It was his decisive victories over the Italians, Operation Compass, that led to Hitler sending Rommel into the sands to reverse the situation. The most distinguished officer to be housed at Vincigliata, O'Connor had won a series of awards during his illustrious career, spanning Italy, Palestine and both world wars. Lieutenant Colonel John Frederick Boyce, commanding officer of the 11th Hussars, who played a major role in routing the Italian 10th Army. One night in April 1941, and his chauffeur got lost and ended up driving straight into the advancing Germans. He was 48 here, already well known by the Italians as a habitual escapologist. Wait for it, this is a mouthful. Lieutenant General Sir Adrian Paul, Gesnar Cato Duverrier, VC, KBE, CB, CMG, DSO, Hangman Extraordinaire. He was the oldest at 62. He had served in the Boer War and the First World War, any war he could get his grabby mitts on. He openly loved fighting and had the battle scars as testament of his enthusiasm to get amongst it. 27 of them. Shot in the face twice, head, stomach, ankle, ear, leg, hip and blinded in one eye. Then of course, looking at that photo, you can tell there's a loss of the arm to make a matching pair. When that left limb was part of him, and he had a hand, he was hit by a bullet in the trenches of World War I, pleaded to the doctor to amputate the 2 wounded fingers. When the quack refused, he simply cut them off himself. Other than those flesh wounds, he was fine. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Duverrier earned the nickname the Unkillable Soldier. Brigadier Reginald Miles, Reggie to one and all, a career soldier. He was the artillery commander of the New Zealand Division in North Africa, captured at Sidi Rezik in Libya. Now 50, he had served with distinction in World War I. Fair to indicate he had had his ups and downs, a bit of a Kiwi battler. Miles was badly wounded at Gallipoli and recovered in time to be badly wounded at the Battle of the Somme. In between the wars, he organised New Zealand's coastal defences, lost his wife due to cancer, becoming a solo father to 4 daughters and a son. His lad would be killed in the sinking of the aircraft carrier Glorious in June 1940. Boyd, Air Marshal Owen Tudor. After serving in the cavalry in India prior to the onset of World War I, Boyd took a major career path turn by joining the Royal Flying Corps. Flew fighters over the Western Front, becoming a commander of the 66th Squadron and the 72nd Squadron in Mesopotamia, which I take has been Iran. By 1938, he was an Air Marshal. It was Boyd that drew up the intricate barrage balloon defences above key British targets. He was on a flight to Egypt in a Wellington bomber, which was intercepted and forced down by 2 Italian fighters, crashed in Sicily. Boyd already escaped and been recaptured once before ending up at Vincigliata. In terms of value to the enemy, the 53-year-old was number one, if only they had been aware of that, because he knew all about Ultra, the Bletchley Park decodes. I can't actually work out how Boyd got to be one of those to go under the wire, so to speak, and since he had a dicky ticker, was known to randomly just flake out, but there you are. Last of the 6 characters, Southland farmer and one-time New Zealand Member of Parliament, has a high school named after him in his honour. Brigadier James Hargest, another Kiwi who was banged up at Gallipoli and patched up and sent to the Western Front, where he was able to avoid serious wounds. Only just though, at the Battle of the Somme, he was sheltering in a ruined house when a shell landed plonk in the middle. Miraculously, he survived with just shell shock. In WW1, Hargest earned the DSO and Military Cross. In between the wars, he was a farmer and, just mentioned, a National Party MP. When World War II broke out, Hargest had his application to join turned down because of that shell shock business, and friends in high places got that sorted. A brigadier in the New Zealand Expeditionary Forces knee-deep soon in the battle for Crete. Arguably, it was his bad tactics that saw the airport and invariably the whole island fall. He was evacuated with what was left of the seconds to Egypt. In North Africa, in which he was tied up, literally, in the siege of Tobruk, in which he and 700 others were captured by Rommel, who he pissed off by not saluting him. Oh yeah, he was about 51 here. Now to the escape plan from our medieval fortress, which I'll break into episodes in order to cover all the nooks and crannies, and thus the need for 2 parts. Let's firstly deal with the obstacles, first being the hilltop structure itself. The castle was surrounded on all sides by 30-foot high walls. Those were topped with barbed wire, and then there were the guards. At any one time, there were 6 to 7 Italians inside or just outside Vincigliata per prisoner, 30 prisoners, 200 odd guards, and 25 sundry Italians in the form of, say, cooks, etc. The 7-storey citadel and grounds were thus crawling with Italians. One thing the prisoners did have in abundance is time to think. By now, 12 months for most. Many of those had come from larger, less salubrious camps in Italy, where escape plans had been formulated but not enacted. When they arrived at their new mountain-top digs, they came with an accumulation of useful bits and bobs, smuggled past the guards, compasses and Italian lira being top of that pile. Even with time, equipment and motivation, support and confidentiality of all those locked up, they needed a leader, a coordinator to bring it all together. And this wasn't any of the 6 I've mentioned. It was this dashing gentleman, Lieutenant Sir Philip Leeming, VC. I will do his amazing bio in the next episode, which I've yet to script. If you now feel I've left you high and dry, go watch my videos on Moore's March. Pop-ups will magically appear shortly, and those links to those 2 videos can be located in the description. That, my friends, is another rip snorter of an escape story and a half. So relax, watch both episodes back to back whilst I complete part 2 here. That's approximately 7 days away, or 1 Venus day. Thanks for getting so far into it. I'll spot you in part 2, where we'll get to the actual escape and what happened to everyone. I'll even bother to include where they were heading. Bye for now.